I'm not even going to really talk to teams today. If you are a person who gets rankled easily and looks to get yourself back to equilibrium immediately, we are talking about you right now. Like we are in this
About
soup
and
with you.
to you.
About and to you. Yeah, because Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm Rodney Evans, and that guy in the birthday shirt, because it was his birthday, is Sam Spurlin.
I mean, it's not my birthday today. That was last week, but it is a birthday present.
Yeah, we can also wish you happy birthday because we weren't here last week.
You can. Thank you. Thank you to you and everyone currently saying happy birthday to their podcast player.
Yeah, everybody in all of our cars and on all of our subway commutes, let's all scream happy birthday, Sam.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome back to Outwork with the Ready. This is a podcast about modernizing organizations, and we are currently in our Depthfinding season, exploring how the future of work meets the present moment.
That's right. This is our, I believe, 5th episode of the miniseries. We've been working our way through the various zones of depth finding, and today we're diving into the midnight zone.
Yeah, I have a PSA before we check in, which is
Great.
if you didn't start this journey with us at the beginning of the depth finding season, it's okay. You can kind of dive in anywhere. Like maybe listen to the first episode where we do an intro, and then you can pick a zone to listen to because all the examples that Sam and I have used, we run through all of the depths with just an emphasis on one depth. I'm saying this because I think this actually might end up being the most interesting, spicy, provocative of the episodes. And if you're just like joining here, I don't want you to feel like, oh fuck, I gotta go listen to 4 other ones, because you don't really.
Yeah. Bold move, telling people not to listen to episodes of our podcast. But hey,
Yeah.
we'll roll with it.
Skip it. Just skip it. You didn't miss anything. That's how you're supposed to do this, right?
Yeah, we're nailing it.
Nailing it. I mean, we have been talking about marketing. Okay, Sam, why don't you check us in?
Yeah,
I'll stop tanking our numbers.
Let's check in. No, I like it. Real simple. What's been a nice moment from the past week?
Oh, for Valentine's Day, Ed and I had our very, very dear friends, Tim and Bridget, over, and we ate a delicious. Tim and Ed are both former chefs and just like wonderful cooks, and they made us the most delicious meal. Bridget and I did not do jack except. We put on nice outfits, and I chose excellent records to spin all night. And it was so fun. It was like the coziest, snuggliest Valentine's Day with like all of the food and then everyone on a couch together, which for my Cancer soul is kind of like the perfect way to spend a holiday.
Nice. All right, cool. Well, I'm
What
going to
about
continue
you?
the Valentine's Day theme by saying, so we already mentioned my birthday was a week ago. So on the 12th is my birthday. My wife's birthday is next week on the 26th. So we have determined in our relationship that Valentine's Day is bullshit and we don't do anything with it because it falls right between our
Perfect.
birthdays.
Yeah.
So we didn't do anything for Valentine's Day, but we
Great.
did go out with some friends to get dinner and play trivia on my birthday. And we named our team the Birthday Boys, even though I was the only birthday on the team. And we didn't win.
That's surprising to me that you didn't
It was
win.
surprising to us too, because we were
Was
on a
the
winning
rest of the
streak.
team dum-dums? Because I feel like you'd be really good at trivia.
I am pretty good at trivia. And there's a longer story here where we thought this other table of probably average age of 75 was the table that beat us. And we were so confused because the last round was 90s songs and they got them all
They
right. And then
nailed
we
it.
realized it was this other table over there. But we were like messing with this table of probably octogenarians who weren't actually playing trivia, and we thought they were.
It was a one-sided battle. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Ed and I recently went to Gilmore Girls trivia, which, if I haven't talked about it on the show, is my favorite show of all time. And considering that the two of us have together probably watched all 7 seasons easily 8 times through, I really thought we would win.
Wait,
we didn't. We did not
no.
win. I think we probably came in like 3rd or 4th, which tells me that I am the least insane about the Gilmore Girls of anyone in that bar that night.
Huh. It's always a real moment when you show up to a thing and you think, "I'm gonna be really
Come and
good." And then you
dominate.
realize that your conception of, like, skill level in this thing is not reflecting reality at all.
No, I was
Yeah,
shocked. I was shocked. And
yeah.
then also I was shocked and then also I was sort of like validated to be like, these people have definitely watched it even more than me. I'm not wasting my life.
I should probably go watch it again.
I definitely did later that night. Anyway,
There you go.
today's episode, we're diving into the midnight zone. And I will be honest that when we were coming up and with this framework and testing this framework, like the midnight zone to me felt the least kind of interesting because I feel like we've seen it all over the place. Like the conscious leadership group has like above the line, below the line. The act work has above the line, below the line. The iceberg model used in all of its form has like the depth that is unexplored. Like the triangle, like I'm just like, we've seen this a
Yeah,
million times. This is
yeah.
not, I didn't feel like there was necessarily something here, unlike the Twilight Zone, that the whole model started with and everything else hung off of. I didn't think we had anything really interesting to say about the Midnight Zone. And as it's turned out, we do. And it's what people want to talk about all the time when you take a thin slice, when you're not trying to talk about culture, you're not trying to talk about a whole organization. When you're taking a thin slice of work, like why the fuck can't we prioritize? It turns out people really wanted to talk about the midnight zone reasons that we can't prioritize. Or if they don't want to talk about it, they at least want a category to label it with.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to dive into today. And, like we've said before, the midnight zone isn't bad stuff. It is just the individual experience that people have as consumers of everything that is happening at the depths above them. So, Sam, why don't you kick us off with just like, what do you see? You work with a lot of leadership teams.
Mhm.
Um, just talk about what is typical and compelling for you when we start to dig into the midnight zone.
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about the Midnight Zone, I am reflecting on all of the teams that I've worked with where we are seemingly pretending it doesn't exist.
Mm.
uh, where everyone is pretty obviously being kind of buffeted by what is happening in their midnight zone and reacting to each other's midnight zone. But because we don't have language for it, or we don't have a culture where we can acknowledge that we have individual feelings and various things going on for us in the midnight zone, we just don't talk about it. And then we wonder why the things that are happening in the more visible zones of the organization, Twilight or Sunshine, are so borked. And I think what has been fun about using depth finding has just been giving people a easy way to have permission to just acknowledge that it exists, and
Yeah.
even only that, not really going into like lots of detail about what to do with it or what is in there, but just being like, yeah, there's some midnight zone stuff going on here, has been a interesting and useful release valve for some of the teams that I've been working with.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And especially, I think in my own career, I think in the careers of a lot of people at the Ready, we have made mistakes at various points of trying to dig into midnight zone stuff with groups that were unwilling or not ready or didn't feel safe to or didn't want to, which is absolutely their right, prematurely. And I think we did that in service of the work that they said they wanted to do, and then often we're met with a lot of resistance. And so it does really feel like this nice shorthand to just be like, it's there's definitely stuff going on here.
Yeah.
We don't need to talk about it right now,
Yeah.
but someday we probably will.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason to me, and I've said this on this podcast, probably in Brave New Work days many times. The reason to me that the midnight zone is just so alive with stuff, with static, with noise, with feelings, with all of the things. at work is in part because it's not acknowledged, and because, as you and I both know, like, what resists persists, and the more we ignore people's human experience, the more their human experience is going to scream to be acknowledged. And we just, at least in American capitalist society, our identities are way too fused with work.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that people, so many, and I've read the research on this, like, an astonishing majority of knowledge workers really consider their title, their work, their promotions, their money, the status, all of the stuff to be a very meaningful and important part of who they are as
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we should not care about our work, or we shouldn't care about doing meaningful shit, or we shouldn't care about, like, contributing to, you know, society in some meaningful way, or care about making money. I love money. But I think where it becomes problematic is when my work identity can't be challenged because my ego is protecting it so strongly because of
Right.
what it would say about me
Yeah.
if it was provoked. And I see the way that organizations completely contort themselves to the least progressed, least self-aware, most fragile person leading them. And that's then the organization that you have, is the person
Yeah.
who has the least psychological flexibility in the place.
Yeah, and if that person also happens to be in a position of great positional power, it's like it's just multiplied. It's just
Yeah.
amplified even more.
Yeah, you're in big trouble. And I see this show up on leadership teams in a variety of ways. I see a lot of being, like, frankly, coddling leaders who have very fragile egos so that they're not provoked and so that they can stay comfortable. And I mean, who among us doesn't like to be comfortable and to like to feel like we're just killing it every day? And the
Yeah.
reality is, like, adaptation of any kind, evolution of any kind, growth of any kind, innovation of any kind. The precursor is discomfort.
Yeah.
And so if you are a person, I'm not even going to really talk to teams today. If you are a person who gets rankled easily and looks to get yourself back to equilibrium immediately, we're talking about you right now. Like, we are in this
About
soup with
and
you.
to you.
About and to you. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think that people's desire for comfort ultimately holds them back from getting what they want.
Yeah, I think, yeah, 100%, because designing an organization for comfort is often counter to designing an organization for function or
Yeah.
for anything else that we care about. And conflating creating an organization for comfort or the comfort of a couple or one person with the organization that we need to do whatever it is that we exist to do, you know, that make that error in your own peril.
Yeah. And, like, you're, even as you say that, some examples of the wildest shit I've ever seen are coming to mind, which are probably gonna make it into this episode. So, look, I think today we're not gonna talk about one case study. We're gonna focus on a composite of leadership teams that Sam and I have worked with because, I think that's how we get the most juice for the squeeze. I think the thing that the only other sort of context I wanna give before we roll in is, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago. I keep regurgitating this quote, which I think was from the head of AI at Microsoft. I don't remember. But someone on a stage said, knowledge work is at peak inefficiency. And I was like, yes. Then I was like, uh oh. And it really rang so true to me based on what we see out there in the world. And I feel like the midnight zone, all of the failings above, all of the failings to respond to the sky, to clarify the aims and assets, to instantiate and evolve great ways of working, a lot of the failures up there come down to broken stuff or unprocessed stuff or swirly, difficult stuff down
Yeah.
here. And so
Yeah.
I just sort of want to say that as we run into it, because I think basically ego is the reason that we are at peak inefficiency in knowledge work at a time that we should be absolutely innovating and having
Right.
like leaps and bounds of progress.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is an interesting idea. I can see why a head of AI may be making that argument.
Sure.
If we
Yeah.
follow that path not too far into the future and see where that may go. But I think you're right. And what is so challenging about the midnight zone for me as a organizational practitioner is that I am not trained nor interested in doing group therapy or
Of
even
course.
individual therapy with people. And that's not to say that's the only path for kind of like working through midnight zone stuff, because I do think even just acknowledgement is does go a long way. But it'll be interesting in this conversation to kind of tease out like what is our responsibility as folks trying to improve how organizations function to directly kind of be in the midnight zone versus just managing our own midnight zone or shining a light on others. Like that's something I'm still thinking a lot about.
I love that. The first thing I want to ask you about is, and I think probably a bunch of like mini patterns are going to get discussed in this episode, but one that I see often is groups of leaders continuing to fiddle with sunshine zone stuff in response to midnight zone feels. And what that often looks like is like we're gonna just keep moving boxes around on the org chart, or we're gonna keep like changing words on the strategy deck, or we're gonna like change our values again because people aren't doing what we want them to be doing. Um, and so I'm curious, like when you see that happen, what is happening in the midnight zone and what's happening in the twilight zone? Do you think?
Well, I think the easier answer is the Twilight Zone, which is not much. Not much
Yeah,
is happening in the Twilight Zone. This is a pattern of a lot of activity in the Sunshine Zone, nothing happening in Twilight Zone, and a lot of unacknowledged activity happening in the Midnight Zone. So you've got these negative feelings potentially kind of boiling in your Midnight Zone, but not necessarily having the experience or the practice to turn those into things in the twilight zone that will support your sunshine zone, and just skipping right to the things that you mentioned, and inevitably not having great feelings at the end of it, or only a short burst of like, oh, we nailed it,
yeah,
before like you kind of revert back to where you are, because
yeah.
you can't address what is happening in the midnight zone through the sunshine zone, and
Right,
vice versa. You need that
right.
that interlocking zone to help translate what's going on between the two
Yeah.
zones.
Can I give you a really stupid metaphor?
Love it.
But okay, it's dumb, but I think it's apt. Um, so our dog Rosie is leash reactive, and she always has been, and we have tried a million things, including
What does
like
that
sending
mean?
her.
I don't
It
have a
means she
dog.
freaks out when
Okay.
she sees another dog on the leash.
Okay. She likes her own
Like
leash, but she's
end of
other dogs.
yeah,
Gotcha.
like end of the leash, like she wants to murder them.
Okay.
When she's off the leash, she loves all dogs and she plays with all the dogs and she goes to camp
Huh.
every week and everything's fine.
Yeah.
And with people, she's fine. But she is
Yeah.
leash reactive. 1 in 3 dogs are leash reactive. It is generally a product of like trauma, which she definitely
Sure.
experienced before we got her. So the other night, I had a terrible walk with her where she just like was completely out of control and not listening to me. And it had been a long time since we had had a walk like that. And I was really, first of all, it's scary when it happens because
Sure.
she basically redlines and like goes out of her mind. And I have
And
to
she's not
like,
a tiny dog.
no, she's a like
Yeah.
50-pound pit bull that can like
Yeah.
absolutely try to dislocate my shoulder. And I feel bad for the other people. And
Sure.
then I feel ashamed that I have this shitty dog that's out of control. And
Yeah.
it's just like it's a bad and then she feels bad about it. And she's, she and I are just like a mess when this
Yeah.
when this happens. And so I later that night I started doing some internet research, which I've done a million times. And I I like found this thing that was like a quiz for reactive dog parents. It was going to give you a training plan and blah, blah, blah. And I did the quiz and I downloaded the training plan. This is quintessential Sunshine Zone stuff. So now I have a training plan.
Yep.
It made the shame go away because I was like, okay, other people experience this.
Sure.
There's an answer. I don't have to just like ruminate on why we are stuck in this loop, I haven't done anything. I have done no Twilight Zone. So I have a
Yeah.
plan in my email. Rosie and I are like, fighting for our lives on the streets. I've done Twilight Zone 0. And like, I
Yeah.
think this is like what teams do.
Yeah, and you feel good right now, but, like, the next
No,
walk
I
that you
feel
go
really
on
stupid because I know better.
but the next walk you go on, yeah, it's gonna be like, "Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
training plan in the email does not a calmer dog make,"
No, doesn't turns out
as
doesn't do
they say.
shit. Yeah, that old chestnut. Yeah, so I say
Yeah,
this because it's like I understand like so often the midnight zone feeling is one that is really unpleasant and we're like what can we plan to make this feeling go away?
yeah,
But then if we don't do anything about it, the comfort that we get from that prescription is really really short term. It's
yeah.
just really yeah.
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 Well, and now I think I'm better understanding why this pattern persists in organizations because if our modern organizations are one thing, it's fucking short term about
Yeah. The
literally
most.
everything. So if I can assuage myself in the short term, great. That gets me
Great.
to the next meeting, to the next board meeting, to the next quarterly review, and let's just keep this rolling.
Yeah. And to the next crisis. Like,
Yeah.
we've been in a conversation with a leader for a couple of weeks, and the conversation started with, we have this really important strategic thing that absolutely cannot fail. And the last conversation was basically like, yeah, we've lost faith in it. And we think it's basically like OBE, like overtaken by events at this point. We're just
Yeah.
going to kind of let it peter out. And I was like, cool. What? Like, but to your point, it's like
Yeah.
they'll pick a next
Yeah.
training plan and make that be the centerpiece for everybody's anxiety. And then they'll forget about that one too.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
I feel like that leads us to like sort of a transformation aim. Why don't
Sure.
you talk a little bit about this one?
Okay. Yeah. So the sunshine zone sort of pattern is having some sort of large scale transformation aim. And you made this really interesting point when we were planning this episode, which I hadn't heard you say before. So I'm excited for you to dig into
It's
it. But you
rude.
said basically, I can tell you which C suite executives are going to make it in a big change, like almost immediately. And
Yeah.
I'm really curious to know, like, what is it that made you say that or come to that realization? And how is that connected to the Midnight Zone?
Yeah. I mean, it's an obnoxious thing to say, but it's also just pattern recognition because I've worked with, definitely more than 100 leadership teams in my career. The people at the beginning of a project, there's 2 signals to me that, like, somebody's midnight zone is popping off in a way that is going to be really challenging. One is just straight up resistance that is masked as questioning the premise, avoidance, and distraction. So,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I once worked with a leadership team who it was one of the worst experiences of my career. And there was a leader on that team who was so profoundly toxic. And like, she would not just do a goddamn checking round. Like the leader of the team had said, we don't have psychological safety. We don't trust each other. We don't know each other. This is a practice that I believe we're going to do it every week before the check in round started. It didn't matter who was facilitating. It wasn't just like because she
Yeah.
hated me, though she did. Every week before the check in round started, she would be like, announcement, or like just do some crazy nonsense to
Yeah.
disrupt the flow of the thing. I'm using this as an easy and very accessible example of a pattern we see all the time, which is someone rather than saying, I don't get this,
Yeah.
or I don't like this, or I don't feel comfortable doing this, or I don't understand how this is going to make us better. Rather than asking a single question or having like a single curiosity, or even saying, I don't want to do this, which to me is
Yeah.
also more productive. There are people who just like will not. And so they just show up and like be a gigantic distracting pain in
Yeah.
every moment.
Yeah. And I think the key thing to keep in mind here, if you're sitting here being like, I see myself in this person. I
Uh-huh.
also hate icebreakers. Most of you probably know this, but our check-in rounds are not like therapy questions. They're not like, tell me your deepest fear or tell me about a recent trauma. It's like, what has your attention right now? Or what kind of candy bar do you like?
Yeah.
Or they're like, I at least I know I am very careful to do very
Same.
innocuous check-in questions almost all the time. The only time when I don't is when it's with a team who knows me really well. They know each other really well and they're down to like do something a little bit more substantive. But I'm
Yeah.
I'm sure you weren't showing up with anything hard
I
hitting
wasn't
in
like,
the old
tell me
check-in
about your
round.
dad. It was like, I think the first check-in round I ever did to keep it businessy for these people who were doing
Yeah.
business kabuki dancing was like, what would you like to get out of this meeting?
Yeah.
I was just like, let's keep it super,
Yeah.
like super heady so that we don't have to feel things. And this person was just like, I will not. So that's one. That's one tell is when somebody is just like, so their ego is such a hard candy shell that you can just feel everything sliding right off of it. And they're just like unwilling to like be like melted even the tiniest bit.
Yeah.
The other tell for me is the people who are way too fired up.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
the
All right.
people who try to convince me immediately how, like, we're the same and they're the only one who understands, like,
Mhm.
those people flame out in, like, week 4. Like, because it's the same thing. It's actually coming from the same place, which is, I'm uncomfortable and I wanna take control of this situation. It's just through
Sure.
toxic positivity rather than being a total butthead.
Yeah.
But the problem is the same. The people in like the C-suite that early on, I'm like, you are the people who seem like they're trying to learn something.
Yeah.
And like the people who are like wrestling, also, I don't care what words they say. Like if they say words that are like negative or nasty or whatever, I,
Yeah.
I don't care at all. If it is coming from a place of like, I'm trying to figure this out, I'm like,
Yeah. You're
you.
doing it. Yeah.
You're the
I
one,
like
because
that.
like, there's enough movement there. There's
Yeah.
enough actual engagement there to do something with, and they're often the people who are the quietest at the beginning, who take the most notes at the beginning, who ask the most questions at the beginning, who, like,
Yeah.
stay after the meeting because they are like, "Why did you do that thing? How is that thing gonna work?" Like, those are the people that I'm like, "You'll be in this a year from now, and
Yeah.
you'll be, like, a different leader than today."
Yeah. Yeah, and if you are like me a few years ago and early in your consulting career, what you will have to watch out for is not being kind of overwhelmed by that toxic positivity person. Because early
Uh-huh.
on, when my own midnight zone stuff is going on around, do I know what I'm talking about? Does anyone like me? Are we doing good work? And somebody comes at you hard with like, yeah, we are the same. I'm like, yeah, we are.
Yeah.
But I have, as I have matured and done more of these projects, realized that is not generally the helpful person. And the ones who I would have been scared of earlier in my career end up being the biggest assets, the biggest partners in
Yep.
actually doing
Always.
doing the work.
Yeah, because 'cause they're the people who wanna be convinced, but not from a place of ego, from a place of learning. Like, they're the people who are like, "Okay, I'm listening. Let's see what you
And
got."
if I'm being at all self-reflective, that I am that person.
Same.
I go to conferences all the time, and I'm like, I don't know if I buy it. Or like
Yeah,
someone comes and does a thing, and like that's interesting, but like let me do my own work to understand it. So I think I play that role when I am not on the consulting side of the desk, and I
I
think I'm pretty
agree.
great. I mean,
Uh, Everybody should be like more like Sam Spurlin, I think, is the message.
that's what this episode is
The
really
message from
about.
the Midnight Zone. Be like Sam. I mean,
Yikes.
I think the thing is like not to, I'm not saying this to like label and judge. But I am saying it as watch outs when you are embarking on something big, because it's a long game to make a big change. And those two archetypes are mostly the problem is they're going to slow you down. And if you work at the pace of the person who is the least adaptable, Man, it's really rough. It's
Yeah.
really rough.
Yeah.
It's really rough to pace the change to the least cooperative person.
Yeah. What do you like when if you notice that happening, like what do you there's an obvious option, which is, oh, this person no longer works here, which I don't know if that's the immediate or only lever to pull, but when people's midnight zones are kind of throwing the dynamic of the team into weird places, like what do you do with that? Is that where like
Yeah.
Twilight Zone sorts of things have to come into play to like translate that energy into something we can do something with?
I mean, I'm curious for your take on this. I think there are a couple things. One is, and I'm taking this from like the best clients that I've worked with and how I've seen them handle this. One is I think as a leader, you have a responsibility to be declarative about what we are going to try and what you expect from people.
Mhm.
And a lot of times leaders who are attracted to the ready are more progressive. The reason they want to work with us is because our Twilight Zone stuff is more participatory. It is meant to engage and inspire and empower and really give people a lot of autonomy to act. So the people that like are magnetized to that tend to be the less command and control, less hierarchical bureaucrats to begin with.
Mhm.
But I think where sometimes they tip too far is that they can be a little bit like hands off the wheel, and I think like you need to do both if you're in that leadership role. I have definitely seen, my favorite clients over time basically be like, we are going to participate in this and it is going to happen. So like we
Yeah.
are going to make this change and here are the minimal expectations that I have of you. And then from there, I've absolutely seen them carve off the most challenging work and exclude the people who can't do it and are
Right.
moving too slow. And I can think of several projects where this has been the case, where my partner, sponsor, buyer at some point was like, you know what? Just ignore those people. Like, don't
Right.
worry about them. Let them just like, as my coach says, let them putter, like, let them business as usual their way to mediocrity. I have you for a limited period of time. We are going to focus
Right.
our attention over here on the people who are like gonna get after it and frankly have the adaptive skill set to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then the work that that group does may change dynamics or things going on more broadly that eventually brings in more people or makes it calm down some midnight zone things for the
Yes.
folks who haven't been involved. But yeah, I think that's right. I think I have fallen into inclusivity even over progress in unhelpful ways. Sometimes I think too often maybe just looking at a leadership team as a single unit
Yeah.
that has some variation within it instead of a an alliance of individuals who are very different from each other and maybe playing not assuming that the only configuration is like the entirety of the team.
Totally. And look, I think this is our own midnight zone stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
when I'm working with a client, I know that like the ways of working and the ways of steering and the ways of measuring that we help people adapt to their context are really like pretty common sense stuff. I
Yeah.
know they're anti patterns for large bureaucracies, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that like they're not yet widely accepted. And so I think that if that is your if that's your stance and that's your core belief, it's really easy for me to be like, "Oh, surely you just don't understand what I'm saying. Or obviously we would be in agreement about this. Let
Right.
me stay in this dialogue, argument, protracted, show me, prove it to me, blah 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 forever because like it does two things to my ego. One is it makes me feel like, well, I didn't do my job right if you're not yet in the thing. And
Right.
two, it makes me like worry about my own ability to be successful. So I'm just like, let's
Yeah.
do it. Now, because I'm older and I've been doing this for more than 20 years, I'm a little bit like my job on this earth is not to convince you of shit that you don't want to be convinced of.
Right.
as you were, I'm gonna go over here.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I feel like I am gaining some of that wisdom from you. I haven't been doing this as long, and I think I don't love a fight, but also like sometimes I kind of do. I don't
Mm,
know, like, and yeah, let's go kind of like head to head on something. And that's my own midnight zone getting activated by somebody else's and losing sight of what I'm actually there to do and
yeah.
what my value to this endeavor actually is. And focusing on just like winning a single person over, which
Yeah.
there's a lot of people in the world and they're not all going to be on your side all the time.
They're just not. And like that's their own midnight zone stuff. And if they're not asking to deal with it or they're not articulating what it is or they're not aware of what it is, like that is just not my work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something a little earlier. You said a phrase like, and I think I have actually said it in this episode too. Like, oh, I'm a little bit older and learned a thing. So one implication of that is one way that midnight zone stuff maybe gets worked through is just through maturation or
Yeah.
age, which really is a proxy for like experience and
Experience.
having
Yeah.
experienced a thing more and more. What other sorts of things come to mind though when you're thinking about like doing midnight zone work or handling your own midnight zone stuff?
Yeah. Um, I mean, so many things. I think that at work, well, first of all, being super clear on what your identity is as a human being, regardless of where you work or what your job is really important. Because if you are fused in this way with your work
Yeah.
identity, you're going to get torqued when it's threatened in any way.
Yeah.
And we see that, we will be trying to do the most benign shit at a client and see somebody just spin out. And it's like, okay, well, we have now hit the third rail of your identity, which is
Right.
wrapped up for some reason in this Excel spreadsheet that you told me to fix. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like that diffusion work is not nothing. And what I mean by that is like, what are the most important things to you really? And even what are the most important things about work? Like
Yeah.
for me, like the most important things about my job are like really learning and like being able to be quite strategic in how I think about our company and our category and our clients and do work like creating depth finding and have like great relationships with a lot of colleagues and make a really fun podcast with you. And that doesn't have anything to do with like my position or like
Right.
how much money I make or like even necessarily working at the ready. Like if I didn't get those things here, I would just figure out how to get them somewhere else because the values are not the sunshine zone description of my job. What I
Right.
actually value about my work is very clear to me. And so when I'm making trade offs, like doing something hard at the ready or doing something unpopular at the ready or whatever, I'm like, yeah, but like my values here are very much intact. And
Yeah.
work is not the most important thing to me. It's like
Yeah.
fourth.
Yeah.
And so I think just knowing those things so that the idea of your project being canceled, your department being downsized, your promotion not going through, your, retirement happening early, if these things aren't existential to your like financial stability, getting your head around what is actually important, I think is like a
Yeah.
pretty good first step.
Yeah. I I think and I think there's a lot of ways to do that, right? Coaching, therapy, journaling, sitting quietly and looking at a wall. Like find your own path to kind of doing that work that works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about
Makes
you?
sense. Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And as you were talking there, I was thinking about how like this is probably one of my midnight zone areas to work on. when I think about my identity, like it's really wrapped up in the ready in probably unhelpful ways. Like been here for a really long time,
Employee
and
number one.
really employee number one, and really, other than my very short teaching career, my only like real work experience. So first major organization here from the beginning. There's a lot there that's probably that has good aspects to it and unhelpful aspects to it. And I think I've been doing my own kind of subconscious work on that over the last couple of years as well. The other thing that came up for me while you were speaking was this is where an organization can do like the twilight zone things that exist in an organization can be supportive of people being able to do that work. So it's
Yes.
easier to do that kind of ego work on yourself if you don't feel like your financial situation is hanging by a thread, that there are support services in your organization. There is a culture where I don't have to show up at 100% perfection every single day. If you are in an environment like that, then there's no time or space or energy to do some of that midnight zone work that you were referring to,
Yeah,
which
that's
makes you
right.
not do it, which makes the rest of the like how the organization functions even worse. So you get into this spiral of people not being able to do midnight zone work, which affects everything else, which makes the midnight zone even more messed up and active. And it's yeah, it's I think that is one of the and that might be one of the an interesting kind of death spiral that an organization can get into.
Which in some ways, I think what you're saying is so brilliant, Sam. And in some ways, it feels like it's by design.
Mm. Yeah.
Like we don't want to deal with the unseen stuff that could poke our egos. And in our incredibly strong but unspoken desire to avoid investigating any of this, we will just keep ourselves distracted in like pathological urgency
Yeah.
and in like basically like fight or flight forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Forever. And
Yeah.
it's interesting cuz like you see this when people lose their jobs, and obviously this is happening en masse right now. And there is so much of the midnight zone stuff that happens is not related to the finances or is not related to the job
Right.
market. It is like it is the upending of an identity, but more importantly, it is the surfacing of a decade of unprocessed shit that people are just like, "Uh-oh." The system that kept me from examining any of this for a decade just got ripped away from me, and now like here I am with
Yeah.
all of my resentments and all of the hopes that didn't get fulfilled and all of the successes that I want to be proud of. Here's all of this stuff and nothing to keep me from looking at it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah. No
have no
container
tools
for
to
it.
do so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
That could be the subtitle of this episode.
Uh-oh. Yeah,
That makes perfect sense to me. I'm maybe this isn't the point to pivot to it, but I am curious because I know when we have been working on depth finding when you were initially pulling it together, it's not we don't write anything about how the midnight zone has to be negative. We have been
totally.
overwhelmingly kind of taking the negative, like what's the negative stuff that lives in people's midnight zones. So I
Yeah.
wonder if it makes sense to just like take a couple of minutes to try to articulate the kind of more positive or neutral side of like what is going on inside midnight zones and how people and organizations can use that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You start. I've been talking a lot.
All right.
You drink
Positive.
seltzer, then you start.
Well, this is actually flat water because and it also vaguely tastes like soap. Did a great job cleaning this
Sam,
bottle.
this makes me sad, man.
Making me sad too. So I guess one way to dig into the more positive side of like what's going on for people is like, all right, well, what are positive feelings and emotions and the positive experience for people at work. And actually, you were starting to hit some of them at the end there, but we firmly believe people have intrinsic motivation to show up, to work hard, to work on things that matter, to be a reliable teammate, to help people, to pull them up when they need it. So when I'm thinking in an organization and knowing that those things are floating around in people's midnight
Yeah.
zones, they may be overshadowed by the more negative things because of our very human brains that are primed to notice and care about the negative things more. I start to wonder, like, well, what are the Twilight Zone moves, and what are the aspirational Sunshine Zone things that really speak to those internal parts of our Midnight Zone that are positive, that want to be seen, and if they are, and they have a path to like coming out, and they will influence what is going on in an organization. So that's, I guess, that's my opening gambit for thinking about Midnight Zone in a more positive way.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like any negative midnight zone thing is one side of a coin. So, like, where someone is fearful, the other side of that coin is probably that they want to do a good job.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
someone is resistant, the flip side of that coin is probably that they're unsure or uncertain, but want a good outcome
Yeah.
and are worried that the new thing won't get it. Like, most people aren't shitty for the sake of being shitty. And most people don't
Yeah.
have shitty feelings that aren't related to a value that is under, it is felt to be under attack in some way.
Right.
So
Right.
I feel like just first of all, noticing that, like, and I've had to do a lot of work around this myself at the ready. Um, when I see shenanigans or I hear about things that my initial reaction is anger, I usually sit with it for a while to be like, what is the other side of this? What is the flip side of this coin?
Yeah.
Because the flip side of this coin is probably something that's not so malicious and
Right.
or, stupid, to be frank. And I want to tell you a quote from my coach Gareth, because we were having a conversation about one such shenanigan very recently.
You can just say it was
And
me. It was me.
oh,
Sam
oh, wouldn't
Shenanigans.
that be funny if I was like, it was you, as it turns out? No, I'm looking for it because I've DM'd it to like 6 people in the last week. Um, Here's what Gareth said to me. He said, the people who are the most demanding and entitled, it is their defense against feeling inadequate.
Mm,
So the
interesting.
positive
Yeah.
side of that is people want to feel adequate. Like,
Yeah.
because they want to contribute, they want to do great work, they want to have meaning, they want to belong. Like, those aren't bad things.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that their feelings of inadequacy lead them to behaviors that are dysfunctional and fucking annoying is a problem.
Right.
But what I try to sit with when I see the thing is like, what's going on here? And it's always something like that. It's
Yeah.
always something like a desire unfulfilled.
Hmm.
And that, I think it's a lot easier to like tap into empathy when you go one click beyond why is this butt heading and go kind of like, what is the unnamed midnight zone thing that's happening here? Not
Yeah.
because we need to talk about it, not because I need to go address it, not because I need to go convince them that they should feel otherwise,
Yeah.
but just because if I can do my own midnight zone work to not be torqued by that so that
Right.
I can stay stable and I can like keep a hand on the till here, that's going to be better for everybody than if every time I hear something shitty, I like run after it to try to change it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And I'm reflecting on how this entire episode we haven't been talking about changing people's midnight zones.
Mm-mm.
It's like
Can't do
midnight
it.
zones are going to midnight zone, and you can change your own midnight zone
That's right.
about how you react to others' midnight zones. And I think if you are in a position in an organization where you have influence, and I would say most people do, on Twilight Zone things, small Twilight
Yeah.
Zone things, big Twilight Zone things. Being aware and kind of conversant in what is going on with people's midnight zones will help you design better Twilight Zone things, or at least help you understand why certain Twilight Zone things aren't having the effect that you hoped they would. But it's
Yeah.
not about like going around and like, I'm going to fix your midnight zone and fix your midnight zone and fix your midnight zone, and then we'll all be good, because
Right.
that's not, I don't think that's possible.
It's not possible and it's a waste of time. And it's
Yeah.
not the leader's job. Like
Yeah.
the leader's job isn't to be the organizational therapist, nor is it HR's job, nor is it anybody's job unless you literally have an organizational therapist on staff
Right.
that is there to help people process their feelings. So my Twilight Zone recommendation here is like get some things in place so that people can go somewhere and process whatever their midnight zone stuff is so that they don't project it onto the organization or the team or the leader or places that it doesn't belong, including incidentally the positive stuff. Like how often do you hear from someone, I'm really fired up and I'm really ambitious and I have a really clear vision for how this could go. And I'm being held back because of this jacked up organization I work in and unable to contribute. Dope. Love to see that energy. And also, how do we get that? How is there a Twilight Zone practice that person having access to? Discretionary, to a therapist, to a coach, to a peer circle, to whatever, so that it does, so that that like great feeling doesn't turn into something dysfunctional later.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. All right, Rodney, I feel like we're coming to the end here, but is there anything else bouncing around in your head that we haven't talked about yet?
The parting request that I would have, particularly for leaders, but honestly for anyone who's working in any group anywhere, is like the way to start to shift midnight zone feelings potentially through the twilight zone is like really emphasize and celebrate the right things. And what I mean by that is not just the outcome, like
Yeah.
celebrate people doing the things that are making them uncomfortable, but they're doing anyway. Celebrate the people who are like trying something, even when and I know you guys, I know leaders out there know when the midnight zone is popping off for somebody and they're just duking it out, they're staying in it to learn and get to the next thing. Like celebrate that
Yeah.
and don't rush to the people who are having the worst experience and trying to drag everyone down because negativity just like it just gets amplified so greatly over anything positive in the organization. We don't want to signal to people that the worse they behave the more attention they get. And most importantly, I said this to a leadership team like last week. I feel like an ingredient in people's development that is under discussed is the belief in them from someone that they admire or they believe in or they've learned from or they see as some sort of totem of authority or a model of something. Telling someone that you know them and you believe in them is probably like as or more important than what skill they actually have to do the thing if it's
Yeah.
true, like if it's true.
Yeah.
And
And
I
even
just
just that you see them, like that
totally,
is can be
that's a
enough.
real thing. And so like, I what I don't I want to shift like the attention from go argue with people who are resistant about why to like really amplify and celebrate in your op rhythm, in your retrospectives, in your woot channel, in all of your places, the people who are just like I'm uncomfortable and I'm doing it anyway,
Yeah.
because those are the people who you want to be your entire organization.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All
All
right,
right.
Sam. Did we
Let's
do it?
wrap. We did. We sure did. Look at us go.
All right.
All right, everyone. You know the drill. Please Like, rate, and review us on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or wherever those things are happening. And if you have a gnarly cross functional problem you'd like to hear about on this show, this very show
This
right
very
here,
show.
shoot us an email at depthfinding@theready.com.
The music for this mini-series is Yagadang by BG and Coyote Radio. This show is produced by the wonderful Jack Van Amberg and engineered by Taylor Marvin. Our team at The Ready makes it all happen by helping companies solve their biggest problems out there so we can share their stories right here. Thanks for listening. This was the last zonal episode. And next week, we are on to a whole new idea, so stay tuned.